Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com, setting the record straight about the global climate emergency. More than 30 years ago, the United Nations warned that we only had until the year 2000 to save the planet from global warming. June 29, 1989, United Nations, a senior UN environmental official, says entire nations could be wiped off the face of the earth by rising sea levels if the global warming trend is not reversed by the year 2000. Coastal flooding and crop failures would create an exodus of eco-refugees threatening political chaos, said Noel Brown, director of the New York office of the UN Environment Program. He said governments have a 10-year window of opportunity to solve the greenhouse effect before it goes beyond human control. So according to the United Nations, we ran out of time 20 years ago. And here we are 31 years later, and the United Nations has once again declared a climate emergency. The story which they're trying to push, and the same one they were pushing 30 years ago, is that Earth is headed towards an imminent climate catastrophe. It isn't clear exactly what a climate catastrophe or a climate emergency looks like, but the data doesn't support their assertion. The number of deaths from natural disasters around the world has plummeted over the past century. Looking at the data a little closer, the number of deaths from weather events has also plummeted over the last century. That doesn't look much like a climate emergency. And over the past century, life expectancy has nearly doubled. Climate alarmists keep saying that increased levels of CO2 are going to affect crop yields, but crop yields are up by a factor of 5 since 1940. Over the past 30 years, malnutrition has plummeted around the world. The number of people living in extreme poverty around the world has also plummeted over the past century. Illiteracy has plummeted around the world over the past century as well. The reality is that humans live much better and much more comfortable lives now than they have at any time in human history. According to the United Nations forecast from 1989, things should have gotten really bad over the past 20 years due to global warming, but the data shows the exact opposite. But never mind the data. The New York Times says it's time to panic, and the Washington Post says the world's going to end in less than 12 years. Now let's go back and look at the latest claims from the United Nations and other governments. The article reads, China, the world's top global emitter, said it would lower its carbon dioxide emissions per unit of GDP by more than 65% from the 2005 level by 2030. In September, China announced it would target net zero carbon emissions by 2060, saying it was raising its ambitions for shifting from fossil fuels to renewable energy. But meanwhile, back in the real world, China is massively increasing their coal usage. Global Energy Monitor, June 2020, a new coal boom in China. New coal plant permitting and proposals accelerate. China currently has almost 250 gigawatts of coal-fired capacity under development. China has no intention of getting out of the coal business. They understand that they need it to power their country. Over the past 70 years, global CO2 emissions have been skyrocketing. Those in China have been skyrocketing over the last 20 to 25 years, but in the United States they've been declining for more than 15 years. The reality is that the United States could disappear off the face of the earth and the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere would still continue to rise rapidly. The United States does not control the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, and neither does Europe. It's delusional for our leaders to believe otherwise. And yet our leaders are quite delusional. This is from the UN article. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson told the summit that countries could work together to radically cut dependence on fossil fuels, change agricultural practices, and reverse the process by which for centuries humanity has been quilting the planet in a toxic tea cozy of greenhouse gases. The reality is that the human condition has massively improved over the past few centuries, and this is largely due to the ready availability of fossil fuels. We no longer freeze to death in the dark at a young age. Without fossil fuels, our civilization would rapidly collapse. Billions of people depend on fossil fuels for their day-to-day survival. Boris believes that greenhouse gases are toxic. Let's take a look at Boris's claim. There's only two significant greenhouse gases in Earth's atmosphere. One is water vapor and the other is carbon dioxide. If Boris actually remembered his primary school education, he would have known that water and carbon dioxide form the basis of all life on Earth. And if Boris would have been paying attention in high school, he would have known that the greatest expansion of life on Earth occurred 540 million years ago when carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere were at their peak. We don't have to guess what life would be like at higher levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We know that when CO2 levels in the atmosphere were 15 to 20 times higher than they are now, life thrived on planet Earth. The entire basis of the Extinction Rebellion is complete nonsense. Geologic history of the Earth tells us that life does extremely well at high levels of CO2. Additionally, NASA has observed that Earth has gotten much greener over the past 40 years as CO2 levels have increased. This should have been expected because it's very fundamental science. The information I'm presenting in this video is basic science, which every serious scientist and politician should already understand. But the reality is that our policy is not being driven by actual science or by actual scientists. In his farewell speech in 1961, President Eisenhower warned about the danger of a scientific and technological elite seizing control of public policy. And that's exactly the situation we're in now. A few fake scientists have seized control of public policy, and the press worships them. But these people aren't pushing any actual science. A few prominent academics like Michael Mann have been corrupted, and they're now in control of our policy. But Michael Mann's not a very attractive person, so they don't put him on the stage often. Instead, they use people like this. There is no climate crisis, and there's no legitimate reason to believe there will be one in the future. The whole idea is complete nonsense. The crisis will occur when government shuts down our fossil fuel supply. Boris Johnson says he's getting rid of fossil fuels, but last week at the peak of the cold snap, wind and solar were producing less than 2% of the electricity in the United Kingdom. Boris's junk science and superstition is leading the United Kingdom towards a disaster, and Joe Biden is hoping to do the same thing to the United States. Toto is not very impressed by how clueless half of the human population appears to be. You can visit him and Kyrie on the web at realclimatescience.com.